Namaste everybody. Welcome to the part 3 of the episode Collection of Data under the series Biostatistics Made Easy by Dr. Suhas Kumar Shetty. In the previous two parts, we have seen what is collection of data, what is the purpose of collection of data, and what are the different methods of primary data collection, and we had in detail talked about the observation method and the interview method. So, in today's session, we are going to talk about some of the other common types of primary data collection. As you all know, the primary data is the one which is collected by the investigator for the first time for his own purpose based on the requirement of the studies. It is originally collected in the process of the investigations by the investigator, and this is called as the primary data. Whereas the secondary data are those which already exist in either published or unpublished forms, but very importantly collected from a reliable sources, which helps a investigator to answer these questions. So, based on the different types of data, like whether it is a primary data or the secondary data, the different methods have been designed. So, some of the common methods of primary data collection includes the observation method, where the investigators observes and records all the necessary information, the indirect or the direct oral interviews, where the investigator or the researcher is going to interrogate in the form of question and answers with the investigator or with the interviewee. And then we have the questionnaire method, the experimental method, the information that are collected from the local agents, and the survey method. So, these are some of the important information that can be used as primary data collection. So, in the previous two parts, we have discussed about what is observation method, what are different guidelines to conduct the observation method, and what are the merits and demerits of observation method. We have also talked about the interview method, what is the interview method, what are the guidelines to conduct the interview method, and what are the various primary and secondary information that can be gathered from the interview method. And along with that, we have talked about the merits and demerits of the interview method. So, in today's session, we are going to talk about the rest of the other primary data collection and the secondary data collection. Coming to the next method, that is the questionnaire method, which is very frequently used method nowadays whenever you want to do a research work on a large sample. It is an ideal method for a research to be conducted when you have a huge number of sample size, like you have hundreds, thousands of participants, and you would like to collect the information in a very short period of time. Then the questionnaire method would be an ideal method to be used. So, coming to the definition of what is a questionnaire method, or what is a questionnaire. A questionnaire is a research instrument consisting of a series of questions and other prompts for the response of the purpose of gathering the information from the respondent. So, what happens is the investigator or the researcher is going to compile a list of questions, and these are given to the respondents, and he, after reading the appropriate instructions, is going to answer these questions and return back to the investigator. So, it is a series where the questions are given and the respondents has to reply for these questions. So, it can be of various types, where a person could do a self-administered questions. Like for example, the questionnaires can be given to the participants itself, and the participant can tick or participant can reply to these questions. Like for example, the depression scale that is commonly used is the Beck's depression scale, which is of a self-administered questionnaire, where the respondent has to reply or respond by himself. Whereas it could be interview administered questions, where the evaluator or the investigator is going to evaluate the respondent and then is going to tick, or he is going to reply, or he is going to answer to the questions. Okay. So, he asks the questions, the respondent is going to reply the questions, and the investigator is going to make a note of this. Like for example, we have the Hamilton Depression Scale, which is a investigator or the interviewer administered questionnaires. These questionnaires can be either direct or it could be through indirect methods. So, direct is where it could be either self-administered or it could be the investigator administered, whereas the indirect method could include the telephonic questionnaires, where the questionnaire is asked through the telephonic media and the respondent is going to reply these questions and the note is made. Or it could be mailed or postal questionnaires, where the questions are posted or mailed to the participant or the respondent. The respondent is going to make a note of these questionnaires and is going to reply to these questions. So, these are some of the commonly used methods of collecting the questionnaire methods. So, the most important thing is what or which questionnaire should be used. So, that is where the investigator or the researcher should go into the previous literature, previous research works, and look for, based on the research question, what are the ideally used questionnaires or the research instrument which could be suitable for this present study. Because for each and every research problem, there are many published, designed and validated questionnaires which are already available, and the researcher can make those questions which are used in abundant in case of research. So, those questions which are properly designed, which is universally accepted, which is easy to administer, and most importantly, this questionnaire is going to answer the research question. So, based on that, the researcher can always select the appropriate question which could fit for his research work. But sometimes what happens, you may not have the available questionnaire with you. So, in such conditions, you can design and validate new questions. So, there are different methods or different steps in which the investigators has to construct, design and validate a question. So, we are going to come out with one more session in detail about the designing and the validation of the questionnaires that could be used in Ayurvedic research. So, coming to the different guidelines that are to be taken care whenever you want to use or you want to make a questions. What are the basic guidelines that one should utilize in preparing a questionnaires? So, what are the questions are present in the questionnaires should follow some basic guidelines, like the question should be simple, clear and understandable and related to the topic. So, there are few terms here, like it should be simple, like whenever a respondent is going to read the questions, it should be very easy and the person should be able to understand in a very easy language, and there should not be a lot of ambiguities. Okay, there should not be a lot of flowery languages and a lot of difficult terms which is not understandable by a lot of unambiguous questions should not be used. It should be very clear, and most importantly, it should be understandable to the respondent. So, sometimes what happens, it could be the researcher could think that he can easily understand it, but he should think from the respondent perspective, whether he is also able to understand these questions. And most importantly, all these questions should be related to the research design or research question, that what exactly you want to gather, what are those information that you want. So, those information should be in the form of questions, label, and then that should be part of the questionnaires. You can use various types of questionnaires or questions, like you can decide whether you will go with a closed ended question or open ended questions, or sometimes you can make a combination of both of these questions. Say a closed ended question where you have some options, like 2 options or 3 options. So, whenever you have 2 options, such questions are called as dichotomous questions, where you have 2, like, do you smoke? Yes or no. Do you feel hungry? Yes or no. Did you have good sleep? Yes or no. Okay. how are you going to reach home, by car or by walk. So these are the questions where there are the options and the respondent has to respond or say the appropriate suitable reply based on the questions. But sometimes what happens, the questions could be open-ended. Like for example, can you describe about your symptoms, how all these symptoms started and how it progressed. So can you share your experiences of undergoing a therapy. So what was your experience of studying in a particular college. So these are the questions which are the examples of open-ended questions where you can give options to the persons to talk about or describe in detail about a particular issue or a topic. So sometimes you also, wherever you want some clarity, you can also go for some in-depth questions, making a combination of that. Most importantly, you should maintain a sequence or order of the questions from the general to the complex. See, generally in research we use a term called as funnel approach, like it will be broader at the beginning and it will taper at the middle part and then it will be straight at the end. So you start with the gross or broad questions, general questions, and then probably based on the research problem you are going to ask specific questions. See, one most important thing is there should be a proper order of these questions, like there should be a continuity of the questions. So it should not be in a very haphazardous manner causing ambiguity in the respondent mind. So as far as possible, try to be very clear in a systematic order. And most importantly, there should not be too many questions or very less number of questions. So there should be an appropriate number of, like, ideally, which could be completed in 5 to 10 minutes, or there could be around 15 to 20 questions. So that the reply rate or the return rate is high. So if there are very less number of questions, you may not get a clear idea about the problem, and if there are too many questions, then the respondent may not answer or may not complete the questionnaires. And most importantly, it should be relevant to the topic or the subject of interest to the researcher. So the question should not be related with the personal characters, to the wealth, or those questions which may hurt the persons, like emotionally the person should not be hurt by your questions, and it should not be related, though you should feel that if it is really necessary, or they should not ask those questions which you feel that it is not related to the present research questions. And based on the memory or the intelligence of the individual or the respondent, the one should frame the questions. So you should avoid the use of those questions which puts too much strain to one's memory or intelligence. So according to the background of the individual, suppose he is a farmer, so he should have the questions which are related to him. Or suppose he is an engineer or doctor. So based on the background and based on the need of the studies, appropriate questions should be framed. So you should not have the double negative questions should not be used, like are you not feeling bad today? Okay. So instead of that, you can just say, are you feeling good? Okay. So always you can use something which is straightforward, clear questions, and you should not always have a leading questions. Okay. So I think you smoke. I think you have sadness. I think you have depression. So as far as possible, so you should not ask any leading questions, and the question should not indicate any alternative to the question. So suppose there are a lot of options, you should not limit the options to the patients, like it should not be limited. The person should always have its own options, alternatives to answer the questions. So that is how, so whenever there is any questionnaires, you should make sure that it fulfill these criteria whenever you are using any questionnaires. So there are a lot of differences between the closed-ended question and the open-ended questions. Each of these has its own merit and demerit. Like for example, the closed-ended questions are easier to compare the response. Like you can say how many of them said yes, how many of them said no, how many of them say right, how many of them say wrong. So it's easy for compiling the responses. Whereas the open-ended questions, so there could be a detailed response, and there are a lot of information which could be shared. Different people will share different opinions. So it is little laborious for the investigators. The closed-end question may be quicker and easier answers, whereas the open-end questions could be unlimited. It is easy to interpret the closed-end question. It is difficult to interpret the open-end questions. Easy to score in closed-end. It is little difficult to score in the open-end questions. It is very easy to codify for analysis in case of the closed-end question. It is little difficult. But see, sometimes you may not get sufficient information by the closed-end questions. So you can get always a detailed information or the necessary information, elaborate information by using the open-end questions. Like the ideal example for the closed-end question is, do you smoke? Okay, the answer could be yes or no. Or like for example, for the open-end questions, so what is your view about the present COVID pandemic? Okay, so a person can give his own experiences in a elaborative manner, describing his experiences, his perception, etc. in a detailed manner. See, each of them has its own merits and demerits, and based on the need, based on the requirement, one can always make a combination of both and do the needful. So there are different modes by which you can administer the questionnaire, like a face-to-face questionnaire administration can be done, where the person is asked and the investigator can make a note of the reply or the response. Or the paper and pencil questionnaire administration, where the items are presented in the paper and the person has to write down. Or computerized questionnaires administration, where the items are presented in the computer or the through internet. Through internet, the questionnaires can be shared and the person can reply in the through the computers or laptops or the mobile or any of the electronic gadgets. Or it could be sent through the emails, like it can be posted to the emails, or it could be the direct posting. The information can be posted and it could be shared. So there are different types of the questionnaires, like you have structured questionnaire and the unstructured questionnaire, like the closed and the open questionnaires. So structured questions, where there are limited number of questions and the specific are given, whereas the unstructured are where there are the numbers and questions are not fixed and the person can have plenty of options. So coming to the merits and demerits of the questionnaire method, the data collected is easy to process and the reply is quite straightforward. The questionnaires are easy to construct and convince to work with. And the most important thing is, it could be used for the larger samples who do not respond very easily. They are easy to respond to the questionnaires, and so these are some of the merits of the questionnaire method. Whereas the demerits may not be suitable to an illiterate respondent, and sometimes there could be a lot of respondent bias. The person may not give the right opinion in case of he could give the moderate opinion through the reply. And sometimes the response rate is very, very poor. Maybe sometimes even 10 to 20% response rate is there based on the research question and who gives this questionnaire. So the feedback is difficult in email or the postal method. So these are some of the merits and demerits of the questionnaire method. So coming to the next method, which is the experimental method. So the method in which the various experiment, measurable tools, investigations are adopted for the collection of data is called as experimental method. So the usage of this method is, it is an ideal objective parameter. Like suppose you have the investigation like the fasting blood sugar. So it's very easy for you to compare before treatment and after treatment, and very important for beneficial for comparison within the group as well as between the group. Okay, and definitely as it's an investigation, so there is lack of the subjective bias. But it has its own demerits, like some of the investigation could be quite expensive, not available at all the places. The chance of the instrument as well as the observer bias could be there, and sometimes it could give the false positive or the false negative results could be there with this method. Okay, so these are some of the merits and demerits of the experimental method. So with this we come to the end of the part 3 of the session on collection of data. Thank you.